Welcome to our 2026 Metrics That Matter learning series. This webinar was supposed to be conducted in March, but shortly after our February webinar, both my husband and I were in a car accident and I was not available in March. So we wanted to make sure that we stayed on schedule because we're really excited about this learning series. And so we'll be doing today's webinar or March's webinar today and April's webinar next week. Hi, I'm Linda Nelson. I'm the founder and president of ICOR, and I am happy to be your speaker for several of the webinars this year, and that will also be added to by a guest speaker as well. I am a member of the U.S. delegation to the Technical Committee 292 that's meeting in May in Germany to continue writing and editing new work on organizational resilience for an international standard. Our 2026 learning series is about metrics that matter and how we can measure organizational resilience to drive preparedness and innovation. This is a very, very important topic because while we still see people and organizations making up their own definitions about what they're talking about organizational resilience, we definitely see a lack of consistency in how that's being measured. And so our purpose really this year is to share with you metrics that matter. What should we be measuring? What are the capabilities and criteria that we should be using for these measures and for these metrics? So in February, we gave an introduction to the Organizational Resilience Capability Assessment metrics. I always reluctant to say ORCA, but it is a very long name otherwise. So I guess we're stuck with the acronym ORCA. Like I mentioned, this webinar was originally supposed to be conducted in March. I was unavailable for that. I am actually still out on disability, but we really wanted to keep to the schedule as much as possible. So today we'll talk about leadership and strategy metrics. Next week, we'll be getting back on schedule and looking at culture and behavior metrics with Dimension 2. And I'm really, really excited to have our guest speaker starting in May, Bassem Obaid. He is from PDCA out of the United Arab Emirates, and he and his company have conducted a lot of these assessments in the Emirates, and he is going to be with us to share those best practices and what he has learned over Dimensions 1 and 2 with conducting those assessments. In June, we'll look at infrastructure with Dimension 3. In July, probably a subject you're very well known about, which is preparedness and managing risk. And again, we'll have Bassem back to look at best practices for Dimensions 3 and 4. In September, we'll look at Dimension 5 on continual improvement and innovation metrics. And then again, best practices back with Bassem. And in November, we're kind of doing something similar to what we did in February with an introduction. We're going to be doing a summary and specifically focus on how you can make metrics and measurements more agile so that you have that continuous improvement process. The purpose of the entire series is to learn how ICOR measures resilience using that ORCA tool. Today, we're going to specifically look at Dimension 1, Leadership and Strategy. And there are 3 strategies with each dimension, so we're going to have the opportunity to answer questions about those capabilities and behaviors, and then see how it is that you score on your own as well as compared to others. The expected outcome of this series is that you'll have a broader understanding of organizational resilience and the capabilities and behaviors that provide data and metrics for measuring that current state of resilience and planning for that future state. When we look at these resilience metrics, um, this is the model that shows about our capability assessment, and we really want you to start having a baseline to understand your strengths and weaknesses so that you can actually work on that continuous improvement. So we have the 5 dimensions, the 15 strategies. There's 3 strategies for each dimension, There's 75 capabilities, where we have 5 capabilities for each of the strategies. And then where the numbers don't multiply up nicely is we have 6 categories for behaviors, and there's 273 of those in total. One of the things that we did when we moved from the 2020 version of the capability assessment to the current version is that we, instead of using more a behavior or a maturity model approach, is we've moved to just having 3 levels or 3 stars and looking at the capabilities from being that initial or ad hoc. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being in level 1 or being initial and ad hoc, because that means you're doing it sometimes up to 49% of the time, which is almost half of the time. And when people think about, starting this process, you have to start somewhere. So maybe you start with addressing performance issues, where you identify and monitor progress towards project performance objectives, as an example. And then with the 2 stars, we're looking at now you're really doing this 50 to 89% of the time, where you're measured and controlled, you're feeling much more capable, and you're using quantitative measures to do this. And here is where you're focusing on achieving both project and organizational performance measures, using that data and metrics to do that measurement. And then where not very many people can get to, because it is evident 90% of the more of the time, is being optimized, where you're stable, flexible, and efficient, where you're trying to balance consistency and flexibility to both drive innovation and manage risk while relying on data and metrics. So as we go through these polls, I'm not going to be able to do the polls since this is a recording of the webinar that we already did. But you can just pull out a scratch paper, and as we go through these metrics, give yourself a 1, 2, or 3 stars on this so that you can have an idea of how you're doing and already start to identify some strengths and weaknesses. The behavior scoring is exactly the same as the capability scores, where we're looking at to what extent you see this behavior. And note we have those 273 behaviors. So that is a big part of this, where we're able to get down into what does resilience look like and what kind of behavior helps to make that capability evident. So here under adaptable and flexible, we have 45 scorings or metrics for that ability to change, evolve, and adapt in response to changing circumstances. Being inclusive and collaborative actually has the most metrics, but here is where we need that ability to work together towards a common purpose or goal that results in shared ownership and a joint vision. Being both aware and reflective, we have 47 sets of criteria for that, where you're looking at to what extent do you anticipate future conditions and learn from past experiences. Being resourceful, creative, and innovative, we have the fewest number of metrics for that. And we're looking here is that ability to find different ways to achieve objectives under changing circumstances. Moving to being both diverse and integrated, that your organization recognizes the importance of the diverse nature of the organization itself, whether it's a product or service or the people themselves, and how that integrates with the working environment. And finally, being prepared, robust, and redundant, making sure that you have plans of action in place in advance of being needed, and making sure that your strategies are both robust and redundant. So while there are 15 resilient strategies, we're only going to talk about 3 of them today. And I will say that this first dimension is probably going to be the hardest one for you to score, unless you are part of top management, because leadership and strategy is really about the things that top management should be doing. And so things like a strategy of having that shared vision and clarity of purpose, an understanding of your context and relationships, and making sure that you have proper governance and accountability is generally a top management responsibility. And so while it might not be something that you have responsibility with at this point, it is something that you should be aware of. And it is where we start with this, because without this, you can't have any of the rest of it. We need to have that leadership commitment. And so looking at leadership and strategy, this resilience and having good business practices and doing well in in your markets does not happen accidentally. So it has to be intentionally implemented, and it has to have strategies to do so. Of course, top management is going to be has to be a key contributor. Otherwise, this isn't going to happen. They have to both make sure it works, but also help to implement those strategies intentionally by delegating. We'll talk about the usual things that make things happen. But those strategies should be rooted or based on having that shared vision and unity of purpose of the organization, as well as making sure that it understands itself, who they are, what they do, who they depend on, how they contribute, and that relationship with everybody else, both internally and externally. So let's get started. Our first strategy is that shared vision and unity of purpose. And our outcome statement is, what are you trying to do? We're trying to say that there is a clearly articulated and understood purpose, vision, and values that provide clarity to decision making at all levels of the organization. This is particularly important when you have some sort of a crisis where all of a sudden you've got leadership making decisions that wasn't planned for, or that might be more personally directed to only help out one part of the organization, for example. But make it, when you have that shared vision and unity of purpose, everybody knows why they're there, and decision making becomes much easier and less divisive, I should say. So, capability number 2 under strategy 1.1 is that the personnel of the organization, that means everybody, clearly understand the organization's vision, purpose, and core values and how they contribute. Everybody knows why they're there, how they contribute, and what it is that they do, and how the organization contributes to this. So when we look at the behavior of being inclusive and collaborative, the organization needs to articulate that vision, purpose, and core values to everybody, and to provide strategic direction, coherence, and clarity in all of that decision making. And then thinking about this, the organization's identity and purpose meets my needs. So here we're actually talking about the individual. So when you're doing the survey and you're asking people these questions, to what extent does the organization's identity and purpose meet my needs for affiliation and social cohesion? Back in the day when I was looking for a job, it was about, I was just happy to get a job that my expertise matched. Nowadays, people are looking to see, what does the organization do? How does it contribute to the world? How does it impact the world in a negative way? And do I want to be affiliated with this organization? And that's whether that could be a government organization, a nonprofit organization, or anybody in the private sector. That more and more people are looking to work in places that they feel meets their own vision, purpose, and core values. And they want to be contributing to the organization so that they feel that they're contributing to how the organization impacts the world. So these are really, really important behavior outcomes. Capability is three. Three is that vision, purpose, and core values provide strategic direction, provides coherent, and again, clarity in decision making. So to what extent does the organization have an ecosystem focus, prioritizing the well-being of the entire organization? And we're using that word ecosystem, again, because we're talking about it as everything globally. That's why we use that first picture of the guy standing kind of looking out and looking at everything. You can't be adaptable and flexible if you're looking too minutely and only in a narrow space. When we're looking at being inclusive and collaborative, there has to be a collective identity which unites everyone around the organization's purpose. And then the question is, to what extent does the organization's core values and behaviors, to what extent have they identified the core values and behaviors that enhance organizational resilience? And to what extent have they established criteria that can be applied to assess individual performance? This is the one I think that will probably get if you're scoring this as we're going through, that you might end up giving only 1 star to. Most organizations have criteria for measuring the performance, of each division, department, and product or service that you're providing, but to what extent have they tied that to individual performance? All of that should be tied together. And then the third capability, or capability 5, is our third one for this strategy, is to what extent does the organization recognize the need to reflect on, and if necessary, revise the organization's purpose, vision, and core values in response to those external and internal changes. So, to what extent does is the organization's vision regularly reviewed in light of future scenarios? Does your organization even look at future scenarios and needs and changes in circumstance? To what extent are the vision and values people and outcome focused? And how does it influence by the need to create a culture of resilience within the organization? And we'll talk a lot more about culture next week. And to what extent does the organization seek out and promote new and innovative ideas to develop and achieve its strategic objectives? So go ahead and give yourself scores for those as well, either the 1, 2, or the 3 stars. So when we were doing this live, we did have a problem with the audio, so I'm actually re-recording this, and we did the poll questions, and you would be able to compare what your scores look like with others. But obviously this is a recording, so we'll not be able to do that today. So the second strategy talks about that understanding of context and relationships. So as an outcome statement, the organization needs to have a comprehensive understanding of its relationship with multiple aspects of the ecosystem in which it exists. It has to have an understanding of the entire operational context and how it operates and achieve its objectives, because that provides the context in which you can look at opportunities or where you might identify potential threats to the organization and get ahead of those before you're just reacting to them. So you need to look at that external or ecosystem context as well as the internal context. So your resilience policy and strategy should be customized to align to both of those. And your policy itself should also reflect the potential threats to organizational objectives and how to create value from emerging opportunities that might arise out of changes in circumstances or conditions that may affect the organization's resilience itself. And so just making sure that you're looking both at opportunities and at threats, and you're looking both outside of your organization as well as inside of your organization, and understanding your environment. So if your organization is aligned to any or certified to any management system standard out of the International Standards Organization, this is essentially Clause 4. Every single standard talks about the need to understand the context, understand your relationships with others, and understanding those interdependencies as well. So if your organization does any of those things, you should surely be leveraging that when you're doing the organizational resilience capability assessment. I'm going to dig into this just a little bit more. So looking at that ecosystem, looking at having a customer-driven, focused mission, and making sure that you're looking at everywhere that your organization's products or services touch, looking at how you organize your work, trying to get away from those hierarchies and silos. We know that if you're in a government organization or you're just an organization that's really large, it's sometimes very difficult to do. But looking at where can we be multidisciplinary whenever possible. Looking at how your work is delivered through your teams, making sure you have high-performing teams and that you've got connected ways of working. How your leaders manage and lead. Are they inclusive? To what extent do they really unlock that full potential of diverse skill sets? Looking at yourself as a leader. How has your leadership changed, if at all, when you are working, as part of a team or leading your group? Or how has it changed, post-pandemic, when maybe we're not all working together as much as we used to? And then looking at the individual and how the work is executed, looking at making sure our talent programs are helping to build more resilient people and helping all of our people to learn, to grow, and to develop in their jobs. If you do that, your people will stay. And so understanding the context of the organization and all of the relationships it has becomes really, really important. So let's go to strategy 1.2 and capability number 6, that the organization's personnel have an up-to-date understanding of an organization's context and relationships. And then looking at to what extent under adaptable and flexible does your organization embrace the power of data and analytics and decision making rather than relying only on experience or judgment. And here is really, really an important piece that we all need to be using data and analytics, and that enables us to be more adaptable and flexible when we have the right information. When you're looking at being inclusive and collaborative, that the organization ensures employees feel connected to others at work and provides opportunities for employees to get to know one another and to develop interpersonal relationships across the organization. Here is, if you're looking at the 2 behavior outcomes under adaptable and flexible and inclusive and collaborative, when we did this in the webinar, most of the people attending gave very high 2 and 3 stars to embracing power and analytics, but they gave much lower, mostly 1 and 2 stars for the behavior number 6 under inclusive, as well as behavior number 2 on connecting and being able to have social connections with your colleagues. In my opinion, based on a lot of data, it's good to have opinions based on data, is that prior to the pandemic, if you'd asked these 4 questions, you would get much stronger answers than you do now. And that is a lot because so many of us are working separately, individually, while you're on teams. You're not getting together for that quantity time of interacting with others and people in your organization. And then moving back to being aware and reflective, to what extent does your organization use things like personality questionnaires, feedback, and other tools to promote self-awareness and reflection with its people? Do you even have time to reflect on how things are going? And then the final one, employees are able to connect and collaborate within professional communities with a dedicated space. That's a key part of this requirement, to share their interests and create social connections with your colleagues. If you've got opportunities to do this without a dedicated space, you can't give yourself a 3. So just think about this and what does that look like when we're working in a more virtual environment? And then the third capability that we're looking at under this strategy is that the organization maintains strong relationships with all of its interested parties and fosters cooperation and collaboration at all levels. That the organization understands and prioritizes the needs of its customers. This should be done if you're a part of any management system standard. This is an automatic thing that should be happening. And that you're collaborating with your interested parties that share your organization's purpose and vision. So here's an interesting piece. A lot of times you'll see those as competitors. And so having that collaboration with it can also prove helpful, especially when you're looking at risk activities. So here, even years ago, the bottling companies, the people that sell Pepsi and Coke and all of the other things, but Pepsi and Coke, they collaborated on what the bottles would look like when you're selling the drinks, what the containers look like, I should say, and put together business continuity or recovery strategies where if somebody's um, manufacturing plant went down, they could leverage the others and putting that into an agreement. So there's all sorts of ways that you can collaborate with even your competitors, but in this case, they're asking you just about interested parties. And then for the final capability for this strategy, that your organization actually seeks partnerships when needed to develop and deliver on its strategy and to support the achievement of its purpose and objectives. And so to see what this looks like, to what extent does your organization and the people in it understand the importance of collaborating and strengthening relationships with those interested parties to help you support the delivery of your organization's purpose and vision? So here, take a minute and do your scoring to see how you've done on the strategy 2, understanding the context and relationships. So our final strategy is really much a top management strategy again. It's about governance and accountability. And top management needs to demonstrate responsibility for the governance and accountability of the organization's resilience, strategy, and capability. And its leaders need to be committed to a sustained focus on organizational resilience. This is not a project, it's not a plan, it's a strategy. It's how your organization works and should be tied in as maybe even an overarching strategy for all of your other business strategies that you have, that you're putting resilience as something to consider at all levels. By the way, when I look at these gears, I'm always looking at the potential for pinched fingers. I don't know, it always distracts me, but it's a nice image. So let's look at capability 11. First off, top management needs to have determined objectives for the organizational resilience strategy and needs to document those objectives in an organizational resilience policy, clearly confirming the commitment of its leaders to build a more resilient organization. And we have 5 behaviors of what this would look like. Number 1, that the organization nurtures resilience in its people in the face of constant change. That there's the collaboration efforts under inclusive and collaborative are balanced with individual accountability, and that employees feel encouraged to be themselves and to speak up at work. That the organization seeks out cognitive diversity, as well as other forms of diversity with its people, to increase its problem-solving capabilities and the management of change. This is an example of the behavior for diverse and integrated. And this is a big deal. That's behavior outcome is a really big deal. You need to have diverse people of all kinds. You cannot solve problems and you cannot manage change unless you're considering all aspects of a problem. And you need cognitive diversity to do that. And we need the organization to determine those beliefs, values, and behaviors within the organization that defines culture. Again, we'll talk more about culture next week. But all of this, really everything in dimension 1 is contributing to your organization's culture. And the organization needs to foster creativity and innovation. I feel like so much now we're giving our people so much more to do that they don't have time to be creative and innovative. You're just trying to get the work done, which is kind of a sad state as more and more organizations are relying on fewer and fewer people. Leaner and maybe not quite so mean, just frustrated. When we look at capability 13, we're now requiring that top management has a governance model, an organizational structure that has roles and accountabilities to make sure that the resilience strategy and strategic objectives are developed and implemented. So to make sure that that happens, we need to have a safe place for collaboration. We also need to have connected ways of working, that the organization is actively monitoring and reviewing its culture to detect any changes that might influence its resilience. And then on the other side, they need to encourage an environment where change is embraced, even when there's some ambiguity involved. And then capability number 14, the top management has specified the authority and empowerment of roles to support and design the implementation of the resilience policy and strategy. Who's in charge of what? If you don't assign anybody and you don't get them authority, then nothing's going to happen. So we need to have that culture of trust and growth by providing encouragement and motivation. We need to make sure that employees are embraced and empowered to make meaningful contributions, that there's an appreciation for employees' non-work demands, responsibilities, and interests. These 2 behaviors tend to score the lowest, what we've seen over time, that this is where leadership is kind of falling down. And so you might see a lower score here than you might for some of the other ones. This one under being aware and reflective is a duplicate of one of the other capabilities. We do see that some of these behaviors work under several different capabilities. That number 6 under resourceful, that there's a conscious effort made, made by the organization's leaders to maintain a positive mindset and to create new ways of seeing and doing things. And then finally, under prepared, robust, and redundant, that the organization empowers people to identify and communicate threats and opportunities and to take action that'll benefit the organization. I was surprised when we did the webinar with the outcome that nobody said that they got 3 stars for doing this. To me, this number 3 behavior under prepared, robust, and redundant is like the easiest one. Is, we've been doing this since 9/11. If you see something, say something. And being empowered to do that and having a place to do that that's safe. So I was surprised to see that most people gave it 2 stars. But this is something that's so easy and should be a 3 star for everyone. So let's see how you did. If you gave yourself 3 stars on every single capability and behavior, you'd have a total of 103 stars or points. So if you ended up with a total of 0 to 54, you'd be in the initial or ad hoc 1 star range. If you were between 55 and 98, which I'm assuming most of you would be at the 2 star, defined and quantitatively managed. And then optimized would be that you did really, really well and you scored between 99 and 111 points. So we hope that you'll continue to attend our webinar series, whether you can attend live or with the webinar recording. So as I mentioned, the March 18th webinar was recorded today on April 15th. Next week, we'll be looking at culture and behavior. We hope you can join us. We do want you to be able to think about how you might gain recognition as a leader in resilience. ICOR does have a learning program as well as 3 levels of certification. That is really intended for those responsible for increasing resilience and for managing risk throughout the organization. And so we hope that this will become a certification that you will want to have on your resume as you follow with your career. Again, thank you for listening and participating, and we hope to have you join us in the coming months, and feel free to contact us to learn more.